Thank you for joining us this evening for our Ellsworth Miller Memorial Lecture, established by Cap Leonard. We'd like to thank We want to thank Cap for his continued support. If you'd like to support the efforts of the Historical Society, you can do so at shebighistory.com. First of all, take a pause to honor the indigenous people who were first to inhabit Shebig, forage its forests, and fish its waters. Thank you. This evening, our lecture will be presented by Toby Webb, member of the Historical Society and past president. This is Toby's 72nd summer on Shebig. He is a retired lawyer, general counsel of New England Telephone and 9X, a published and certified genealogist in his retirement, a past officer and trustee of the New England Historic Genealogical Society, a past trustee of the National Board for the Certification of Genealogists, and of course, as I said previously, past president of the Shebig Historical Society. Toby, it is my pleasure to ask you to come forward and begin your presentation.
Good evening and thank you all. I'm being distracted by cheerleaders in the third row. I'm delighted to be back to give another lecture for the Historical Society. Stacy and I were checking through some old photo albums to confirm that it was 10 years ago I gave a lecture on DNA and genealogy. And so what we thought we'd touch on tonight is what's happened in the decades since then in the world of genealogical research. What I'm going to be talking about is a little bit about DNA, some about artificial intelligence, which is a sort of a buzzword in the intellectual world right now, major steps in digitizing original records and making them available to us all online, and then finally just a little bit about the 1950 US Census, which is an every person listing in the country, which became available to us just a couple of years ago because it was under lock for 72 years after the census was taken. Before going into those topics, let's just remind ourselves why we study family history at all. There are a bunch of different reasons. Some people just want to know what their heritage is. Some people want to know what medical issues might track down through their lines. Some people are adopted and unaware of who their biological parents are and on a search to find them. A lot of different reasons that we may want to study family history, but to all of those causes, there's one common theme, which is we're asking questions and we want to find a true answer to those questions. So the issue is what tools are available to us to answer those questions correctly. Because as we say in genealogy, genealogy without evidence is just myth. Nice stories that you've heard in the family, but we can't be sure if they're true. So what evidence can we find to find the truth? To structure tonight's discussion, I wanted to pose some sort of a genealogical question that we could be keeping in our minds to say, would this tool help or wouldn't it? And so I just, for no particular reason other than it was a name I knew from Shebig history, but about whose family history I knew nothing, I decided that our question for tonight would be, did Leroy Hill, for whom the Roy Hill Crossroads is named, did he have an ancestor who served in the American Revolution? Will DNA help us answer that question? Will artificial intelligence help us answer that question? Will the new records that are online help us to answer it, or is there possibly even something in the 1950 census? So let's start with DNA. This is an English major's understanding of DNA. DNA is a chemical code in our cells that is basically the instruction booklet for our bodies. And it provides the codes that construct both our physical being and also the mechanisms that help us live, heartbeat and the like. When I gave my talk 10 years ago, there were two types of DNA that we were focusing on as genealogists. Y DNA, which comes down from our fathers, and mitochondrial DNA, which comes from our mothers. And the big change in the last 10 years is the focus on something called autosomal DNA, which is basically all of your DNA other than the two sex chromosomes. This is the Y DNA. This is a path back to from a male, back to our father, our grandfather, and on, or actually it's being passed down from the prior generations to us. And it only comes to sons. This is a helpful tool for people who are trying to prove paternity because it positively identifies, was somebody the biological father of a particular son. And it could be used for ancient history if you could find a descendant of a particular person that you thought you were descended from who was in this direct male line. And you could compare your Y DNA with that person and find out whether there was a match, which would indicate at least a common ancestor, a common male ancestor sometime in the past. But other than that, it has not proved to be very useful for creating family histories, for identifying close relatives, for some of the other reasons that we study family history. The second type of DNA that we looked at was mitochondrial DNA. This is passed from a mother down to her children, but then since only a female can pass it down, it goes from female to female to female and can stop with a son, but can't be passed on by a son. And if you remember the great genealogical news from 10 years ago, it was the mitochondrial DNA that was used to track down from his grandmother to her daughter, his aunt, and then down through a maternal line for 16 generations to a woman in Canada who was the mother of a son who carried the mitochondrial DNA but could not have passed it on, so the line would have stopped there. But the mitochondrial DNA from that grandmother 17 generations back was the same mitochondrial DNA that had been found in the skeleton of Richard III when he was unburied from a parking lot in England. And that's how they were able to use that DNA to prove that that actually was Richard III's skeleton that had been found. So that was a very helpful use of the maternal DNA being passed down. But since names change traditionally with each female generation, it's also a difficult tool to use to go back in history because the family name doesn't stay with the chromosome. So the move in the past few years has been to what is called autosomal DNA, which is basically the rest of your DNA. Well, the rest of your DNA within limits. Actually, all of us share 99.5% of the same DNA. And we share a lot of that with every other creature that's on the earth. But that last 0.5% of DNA is what makes us each different from each other, and that genealogists are interested in studying. And so starting in 2012, Ancestry.com started selling DNA collection kits to collect autosomal DNA. There had been a couple of commercial sites before then who had focused on the Y DNA and the mitochondrial DNA. And I actually thought that Ancestry was a little late coming to the game, but that they were a marketing company and they were just going to try and get in on the business. But by focusing on the autosomal, from which, as you'll see, you can get a lot more different information, they've actually sold now over 26 million test kits. And the database they have as a result from all of those DNA samples has made it possible to do an awful lot of very good ancestral research. So if you do a DNA swab with Ancestry and submit your sample, they'll give you lots of different types of information that they can extract by comparing your sample with other samples that are in their database. And the one that most people know about is sort of country of origin, area of origin, where men in kilts suddenly find out they should be wearing lederhosen instead in the ads. This is what an autosomal regional ancestral chart for me looks like. It's not proportional because I have a 1% Eastern Europe and Russia DNA exposure, but obviously that covers an awful lot of territory, and who knows where. The most of my DNA actually comes from the very small blue spot over here in central England. But this ability to look at your DNA and then compare it, and what they're doing is comparing it with the DNA samples they've gotten from people who still live in those territories and who have been in one place for generations and generations and generations, so they can establish a model of what the DNA from that territory probably looks like. Then they compare yours with it and are able to come up with these guesses. And that's really all they are. They're samples compared with other samples and saying this is what we think you compare to, but if we get more samples in our database, that may change. Of course, Ancestry now, with 26 million samples, has a pretty good database to compare you against, so this is getting more and more detailed. So the regional ancestry is one purpose that we're using DNA for more and more these days. The next is to find particular people that you match with. And my niece is sitting up in her seat in the back because she sees her name up there. This is a clip from Ancestry's report on who do I match with that's in their database that they can compare me to. And so you can see my eldest brother, Jeff, up at the top. And as you look down this list, note this particular number. It's called the centimorgans, and we'll be talking about the significance of that in a moment. But each sample, they tell you how many centimorgans do you share with the person that you're being compared to. Think of centimorgans as centimeters, although it's not at all accurate, but it's a measure of how much of the entire DNA that's being compared do you share with this other person. And you have about 6,800 centimorgans of DNA in these tests. So from each of your parents, you'd get about 3,400 centimorgans, and it halves each time a relationship ships a generation. So you can see that my brother had 2,600 centimorgans. His daughter has about half of that, 1,600. Her son has about half of that. It varies with each sample. And so it's pretty easy to recognize your close relatives, partly because you bought the DNA tests for them to use. But but then we get out to more extended families. Susan Brown is a cousin that I've grown up with, so I know her. But then I get into people who I have no idea who they are, but the centimorgan shares show that they are second or third cousins, and that I should be tracking down how do we actually connect. What these statistics come from is a lot of scientific work that's been done with one particular group of genealogy experts who are also scientists. And so they got very excited about what the DNA could possibly reveal. And what they've done is taken the DNA samples and the proven relationships, proven by other means, in thousands and thousands and thousands of samples, and have developed this chart where you can start in the center, and then by looking how many centimorgans you share with somebody else, you can estimate what the relationship is. And so if you have a sample that is, let me just say, 250 centimorgans, quite likely that's a second cousin. It will be someplace in this range, they think, of 41 to 592, so it can vary quite a bit. But they focus, and these are the averages for all the relatives that they've tested in the database. And this is constantly being refined as more and more samples come in. But they can therefore, on the prior chart, if they see 691 centimorgans, then they can go to this chart and figure out where would that relationship possibly be. It could be a first cousin, but it could also be, where's my nephew? There's going to be a grandnephew. They're down in here. So that's the way that the centimorgans are used to estimate different relationships.
For those of us who are a little slow, could you remind us again what a centimorgan is?
It's a unit of measurement for comparing DNA. It is complicated, and I don't understand all of the science behind this, because it's actually an estimate of probability of somebody with these this amount of shared DNA being having particular changes in their DNA at particular points in the strand. So it's a mathematical probability estimate, but it's a tool that is best thought of as just a measure of length, because we can understand that metaphor. If you had a strand that is 6,800 centimorgans long, how much of that is comparable to the other? But I can give you a book, Nick, that will explain it. You got it. And there isn't a quiz. Okay, so one of the uses of this new autosomal DNA is to do these kinds of relationship guesses in your matches. Another use is that if I put up my family tree along with the DNA sample that I have submitted, and somebody else puts up a family tree with the DNA that they've submitted, the service is able to go through and compare the two family trees and find out where do you have a common ancestor in the two trees, and then does that match the centimorgan measurement that's been derived to establish that you both are the same descent, you are the descent from that common ancestor that was estimated. So in this case, with Susie Brown, the cousin that I mentioned, they are estimating that our common ancestor is my great-grandfather, William Butler, and my great-grandmother, Florence Rodman. If you look back in her this is her family tree, but you look back and you end up here with that pair. And they are, in fact, the great-grandparents of both me and my cousin Susie. Lucinda Smith was my mother's first cousin, and because she was orphaned at an early age, they actually were raised together as sisters. So that's how I know that particular cousin so well. But so it helps you put together two different family trees and find who is the ancestor that you've got in common. Now that's very helpful or very reassuring if you know the relative and you say, yes, that's what I always thought. But often you don't know who the relative is that you suddenly matched with. And this tool also helps you figure out where might the common ancestor be. So this is the matching that was done with me from somebody named Kathleen Harvey. I don't know anybody named Kathleen Harvey. If you look at her couple of first generations on her father's side, the names are Williams and Basham. Those are not names that have ever shown up in my research. But by looking at her family tree, I'm able to see people named Peacock showing up. And in fact, my great-grandmother was a Peacock in England. She was the daughter of William Francis Peacock and Margaret Weaver. She was the sister of this fellow. And so we're able to say, oh, okay, that's how we connect. It's in the Peacock line. And then we can do some more research if we need to see how those are brought down to tie us together. That can be wonderful if you're looking to make the connection with relatives. I've had one case where a woman contacted me. We were third or fourth cousins. Could we track down what the connection was? Because she had been adopted and she didn't know who her biological parents were. And using this, I was able to figure out not just what line we had in common, I was able to figure out who her half-brother was. And I shared that with her, but she then approached her half-brother, and that did not go well. So sometimes this leads to unexpected complications if you're using these tools as powerful as they are. So there are a few issues that have arisen with DNA. First is you have to have two samples to compare. And so not every problem can be approached if you don't have a sample from the line that you think you're trying to connect with. This all burst forth on the scene without anybody really thinking through the bioethics of it all. And now there's some real privacy questions that have arisen. They were really brought to the fore when police departments realized that they could take the DNA seen from a crime, submit it into one of these services, and find out who the relatives of the criminal were. And then track down and say, okay, which of your cousins was in the right place at the right time to have committed this crime? And some people thought that a tremendous invasion of privacy. Some thought of it as a wonderful new use of science to catch criminals. It's caused a lot of debate among genealogists. I never gave up my DNA sample for that kind of use. And so it's debated still whether that's appropriate. There is a fear, although I've never seen evidence that this has actually happened, but a fear that this could all be used by insurers in the future. All this data is up online, and they could look for the markers of particular diseases and decline to insure people who had those markers. So that concern has been swirling around as well. And there, as I said in my example about the half-sister, not everybody wants to have close relatives, supposedly close relatives, knocking on their door. And once these samples are up there, it's not just your DNA that's up there for your purposes, it's up there for everybody who's in your DNA tree. Their information is up there as well. So this...
Another issue which we came across was adoption, because we had an adopted child in the family.
and she, I think, it turned out that the information was handed over to her natural family. They found out where she was, where she lived, what she did for a living, and wanted to come see her. And she had to hire a lawyer to get a cease and desist.
Mm-hmm.
So I think sometimes young people sign things and they don't realize the impact of what could happen. And that's just a
Yep.
warning.
That's exactly this example, that there are relatives who perhaps don't want to be found or don't want to be connected or don't want their privacy invaded. And it's not just young people who sign things like this. Every one of us who did a DNA test 10 years ago never realized that we were creating this kind of exposure as well. Sarah?
So do you mean, I've never done one of these and I'm not really interested in doing it, but are you saying that if you go to this firm, this company that does this, that you're agreeing not just for your data to be used by anyone else who has signed on with them, like you were describing, but made public?
That's what the legal debate is right now. Is it already been made public because you've shared it in this way? Or if you said, I'll share it with other members of Ancestry, and the Cumberland County gets a subscription, Cumberland County Police Force gets a subscription to Ancestry, they have access to that as well. So it's the genie's sort of out of the bottle, regardless of what the paperwork might sign.
Toby, would you like to wait till after your lecture for people to make comments and ask questions?
Probably so, just because I've got a lot to get through, but
Thank you.
we're all friends. The last issue, of course, is that you do a DNA test because you want to find out about what country, what part of Ireland did you come from, or something like that. And the test comes back and says that your DNA isn't the same as your father's, or somebody further back in the tree. This was originally a concern called non-paternity event. And genealogists had to correct that because there was a father. It wasn't that there was a non-paternity event. And so it's now called a misassigned paternity. But just in the last few years, there have been 3 different books, at least, that I'm aware of, written by people, and these were all fairly significant writers, so they had the opportunity to publish their results, talking about the fact that they found out that their father or their grandfather was not who they thought it was. So Bill Griffiths, who served with me on the Board of Trustees at the New England Genealogical Society, you may have seen him, he was a financial reporter on some of the cable news networks for a long time. He found out that his father was not his father. His father had raised him, he'd grown up with his father. His book, The Stranger in My Genes, is about first coming to grips with that, and then trying to figure out how could it happen, and then being curious about the other family. And the book ends with him driving up the driveway of his biological brother, but then not being able to go and knock on the door, feeling I don't have the right to do this, as Anne suggested, and backing away from it. The non-paternity events or surprises in close relatives, according to the Pew Research Foundation, something I read just that was published in the Huffington Post last week, 27% of the people who take DNA tests are likely to find a surprising DNA connection of some sort. So that's another reason why we might want to hesitate in taking these tests. And yet they are a wonderful genealogical tool. And so it's about...
I don't want to interrupt your lecture, but I do think that there's the flip side of it, because I've been involved in multiple situations where people didn't know their family, and
Yeah.
it just happens because they found me on Ancestry and I've been able to connect people very, very close. And I have to tell you, one of my cousins found a biological child he never even knew existed. And he called me when he met him, and he said, "You have made my life. I am so happy. Thank you. You are the dearest cousin in the world." And it took a long time to figure it out and to get to that point. But I think there is that flip side, so I don't think
Oh.
everyone should think that everyone is a disaster.
No.
There are a lot of people who have had wonderful, wonderful stories.
There is a friend on Cottage Road that I grew up with who was adopted and did this type of search and found his biological mother, and it has been the happiest of reunions. So yes, that's,
Everybody doesn't go out thinking.
yep. Okay, so that's sort of where we are with DNA right now. It's an increasingly powerful tool because so many people have jumped into it and provided information from the database. But some of the ethical ramifications of it are just being struggled with now, 10 years after this ball started rolling. Let me talk next about artificial intelligence. A lot of buzz about artificial intelligence, and I had never actually worked with it in genealogy. So I was very curious as to how this tool might be applied. As a lawyer, I was fascinated when I heard that Michael Cohen had submitted a brief to court which had been created by artificial intelligence. And when the judge and the lawyer for the other side started looking for the cases he was citing, they couldn't find them anyplace. They looked like citations, they looked like cases, they were talked about as though they were actual cases, but they actually didn't exist anywhere. So I thought, what would artificial intelligence do with genealogy? So this is 2 weeks ago in my first experiment with using artificial intelligence. And I found for the first time ChatGPT, which is the writing tool that's being used on a lot of websites now. And I put in this particular instruction. Please write a genealogical narrative about Morris and Hamilton, farmer and stone sloop captain, who died on Chebeague Island, Maine in 1884. Now, Morrison is my actual first name. Toby's just a nickname. But I think Donna will vouch for me, being the expert on the Hamilton clan, that there never was a Hamilton named Morrison Hamilton. Within 45 seconds, this is what came back. Morrison Hamilton's story is one of rugged determination and deep-rooted connection to the land and sea of Maine. Born in 1822 in the coastal town of Cumberland, Maine, Morrison was the eldest son of James and Margaret Hamilton. His family had deep roots in New England, with his paternal grandfather, Thomas Hamilton, arriving from Scotland in the early 1800s. Thomas had settled in Cumberland, where he established a modest farm and raised a family amidst the rocky and rugged terrain of the Maine coastline. But by this time, I wanted to see what Morrison Hamilton looked like. So I asked artificial intelligence to create a picture. I uploaded a picture of myself, and I asked for a good 19th century sea captain. I actually sort of liked that look. Morrison's early years were marked by hard labor of the farm. His father, James, was a stern yet fair man, instilling in Morrison a strong work ethic and a sense of responsibility. The harsh winters and rocky soil of Cumberland tested the Hamiltons' resilience, but they persevered, and young Morrison grew accustomed to the demands of farm work. So I read this to you. Listen for what are the actual facts that are being provided, and what's just the sort of the nice little narrative that could apply to any name that we stuck in there. As he came of age, Morrison's ambitions extended beyond the farm. The proximity to the sea and the bustling port of Portland ignited a fascination with maritime life. In his early 20s, he apprenticed under a local stone sloop captain, learning the intricacies of sailing and navigation. The stone sloop, a small, sturdy vessel ideal for coastal trade and transport, became Morrison's passion. By the late 1840s, Morrison had earned his own captaincy, taking over the helm of his own stone sloop. His ship, christened the Perseverance, was known for its reliability and the captain's unwavering commitment to his cargo and crew. The sloop navigated the rugged coastline of Maine, ferrying goods between ports and occasionally venturing to the larger harbors of Boston and New York. Morrison's reputation as a skilled and trustworthy captain grew, and he earned the respect of both merchants and fellow seafarers. Despite his maritime success, Morrison remained deeply connected to his agrarian roots. In 1850, he married Ellen Blake, the daughter of a neighboring farmer. Ellen, a woman of both grace and fortitude, became his steadfast partner in both life and business. Together, they managed their farm in Cumberland, which provided a steady source of income and a base for their family life. The couple had 3 children, Margaret, James, and William. Morrison balanced the demands of seafaring with his duties on the farm, often returning home during the off-season to tend to the fields and spend time with his family. His children grew up learning the value of hard work, both on the farm and on the water. Margaret, the eldest, showed an early aptitude for leadership and community involvement, while James and William inherited their father's love for the sea, though their paths diverged as they grew older. In the latter part of his life, Morrison began to scale back his maritime endeavors. In 1875, he sold the Perseverance and focused more on managing the farm and contributing to his community in Cumberland. By the early 1880s, Morrison and Ellen decided to retire to Chebeague Island, a peaceful retreat where they hoped to enjoy their remaining years. They purchased a modest homestead there, but Morrison's health began to decline. Despite the beautiful surroundings and the tranquil pace of island life, he faced persistent health issues, and he passed away on Chebeague Island on August 11, 1884. His death was a loss to both his family and the local community, where he was remembered as a man of integrity and perseverance. What a man! And not a word of it is true. So that was my first essay into what would artificial intelligence do. So then I thought, well, what would it do with somebody who actually did exist if we asked artificial intelligence to do a narrative about somebody else? So I asked it to write me a narrative about Roy Hill. This is a clipping that Donna pulled out for me from the collection of the Historical Society. Roy Hill was an actual contractor here on the island. I knew him when I was a kid because he took care of our family house for my grandmother. And so artificial intelligence did a similar, effusive biography for me, all in less than a minute, about Roy Hill. And this is what it reported, that he'd been born on Chebeague to Charles Hill and Margaret Thompson Hill, that his great-grandparents were among the early settlers of Chebeague, that he and his father were fishermen, that he married Elsie Johnson of Chebeague in the mid-1940s, that he had children, Robert and Emily, and that he was active in the Chebeague Island Historical Society before his death in 1978. We'll go through some other records, but I can tell you that the only thing that the artificial intelligence got right on this was that his father's name was Charles. And all the rest of that is also made up. So my conclusion about artificial intelligence right now is not so fast. And we'll wait for people to refine it better for genealogical purposes than just trying to hope that it's going to do your research for you. So the third main topic that I wanted to talk about is the digitization of records. It is a mantra in family research that you go back to original records to prove that what you heard from your grandfather was not just a myth. You look for some sort of a record. And most of those records in New England or around the country have been paper records when originally created. In the 1930s, the Mormon Church, the Church of Latter-day Saints, which has as part of its religious dogma the view that if you can identify somebody who had died in the past before they had the chance to hear the learnings of the church, if you can identify them and take them into the temple with you for baptism, they can be baptized into the church even though they're long gone and be thus saved, and also the family unit kept together for eternity. That's just the religious belief that they have. So they're very, very interested in being able to prove family history. So in the 1930s, they began a process of going around, first around the country and then around the world, with microfilm cameras and going to every repository of human records they could find to photograph birth records, death records, tax bills, property deeds, wills, anything that would show the presence of a human at a particular place and time and help tell their story. And they then gathered those on microfilm, and this is a microfilm reel in the center, which are like very, very small pictures of each document. And you put them on a reader like that, and you scroll and scroll and scroll until you find the image that you're looking for to try to find the family record. And at the Family History Library in Salt Lake City, where I go usually for a week every fall to do research, there are rows like this of microfilm cabinets. And I think there are about 15 rows, and this is about half a row, and they're double-sided. So that in the beginning of the rows is microfilm number 1, and at the end of the rows was microfilm 2,500,000, something like that. Just an incredible collection of data. But to get at it, you had to go to Salt Lake City or have them send a microfilm to one of the local churches for a studying center there to look for it on microfilm. And about 2015, the Mormon Church and Family Search is the name of their nonprofit genealogical side. Family Search decided that it made a lot of sense to take each one of those 2.5 million rolls of microfilm, digitize it, meaning scanning each of those images so that it could be recovered over the internet, and then make them all available, or at least all of those that they had copyright permission to put up and publish that way, make them all available on the web. They estimated in 2015 that was probably going to take about 15 to 20 years to complete that project. But they'd finished it by 2021, September 2021. All 2.4 million reels of records had been digitized and made available on the internet. So how might that help us answer our question? Did Leroy Hill have an ancestor in the American Revolution? Would digitized online records actually help in solving that question? Well, we start where good genealogical research begins, which is you work backwards from what you know towards the past. You don't make the mistake of finding somebody named Hill at the time of the Revolution and then working down and seeing if you can be proved to be connected to Roy, because that way lies madness. Those trees can branch in many, many directions. So we always work backwards from what we know. So for me, in an afternoon, sitting at my desk on Shabby, what could I find out about whether Roy Hill had an ancestor who had served in the American Revolution? The first thing I pulled up was the Maine Death Index, just to see if I could get some specific dates about Roy. And that gave me both the date of his death 8 July 1978. It also gave the death certificate number so that if I wanted to go and actually look at the actual death certificate, I'd be able to do that. But that gave me a starting point, Roy Hill's death. Then I looked at the Social Security death index. Every one of us is in the Social Security records, and when we die, they publish the fact that we have died so that nobody can use our Social Security number under false pretenses for somebody else. So I was able to find that Roy Hill had been born on the 7th of August 1889 and that he died in July of 1978. That helped me pull up a newspaper clipping of his actual obituary. The obituary said that he was born in Portland, the son of Charles and Julia Packer Hill, that he attended Cousins Island School, and then further down that his wife was the former Mabel Bennett, and that she had died in 1971. Next, I wanted to prove when he was born, and so normally that would have meant going to the city of Portland, to the clerk's office, getting an old volume off the shelf, this old volume, volume 10, but it's been microfilmed and is there in the records. And in citing it now, I always include this number down on the bottom, the IGN number. As they've done this digitization process, all the old microfilms had a number at the beginning, but some of them matched, some of them were confusing, so they assigned a new number to each set of records. And that, at the Family Search website, you can just put in that number and it will immediately bring up that film. And if you've included the image number, then you can just click immediately to the record and see the original record again. So I was going to be looking for Roy's birth in Portland. And here's the page that includes it, but since I knew that was going to be hard to read, I've blown up for you Roy, Leroy H., August 7th, 1889, Charles and Julia. And we'd read in his obituary that his father was Charles and his mother was Julia Packer. But now we've got not just an obituary, we've got an official town record saying that that's when he was born. So I'd look for Mabel, his wife, as well. And this is the record of her birth. It comes from a different source. This is from the state birth records. But it says she was born on Shebig to William Bennett and many, is it Granell or Grenell? Grenell. Okay, I thought that there would be people who would recognize this particular family connection once I saw that name.
Well, on Shebig, it's okay if you say Granell.
Okay, thank you.
Joan is very happy that you said that. Those are her grandparents.
Okay. So we've established here is a Shebig connection, but it's not necessarily where Roy Hill actually came from. When did they get married? Well, the New Hampshire marriage records show that Roy and Mabel, on the 30th of April, 1910, went down to see a justice of the peace in Portsmouth and announced that they intended to get married. And on the 30th of April, did get married. So it sounds like an elopement or a quick trip down there. Sadly, the reason for that showed up in the next record. This is a death record here in Portland for Leroy Hill, which is the way I pulled it up, but it turned out this is Leroy Hill Jr., who was born on the 25th of November, 1910, 8 months, whatever, after they got married, and died on the 26th of November. So they lost their first child. But then online also I found his grave marker here on Shebig, which is available to the internet on a website called Find a Grave. And so I was able to put the death record and the grave marker together. And from Mabel's Social Security file, I was able to find out that her middle name was Wilhelmina. So what do we know so far about Roy Hill's actual life story? Artificial intelligence said that he was born on Shebig to Charles and Margaret. He was actually born in Portland to Charles and Julia. Said that his great-parents were among the early settlers of Shebig. We'll find from some other documents later that not only did he go to the Shebig school, as his Cousins Island school, as his obituary said, but that his great-great-parents were among the settlers of Cousins Island. Charles and Roy were fishermen. No, Roy and his father were both carpenters. Roy married Elsie Johnson of Shebig in the 40s. He married Mildred Bennett in 1910. Robert and Emily, no, Leroy and Freeland. Active in the Shebig Island Historical Society before his death. He died in 1978, and we were founded in 1984. So this is just further indication that when you look at the records, there are some things that artificial intelligence seems to have missed. So just with those records so far, what tree have we created for Roy Hill? We've got his parents. We've got him in the center, we've got his children, and we've got his parents identified. Let's see what more we can find out about the parents. Here's a Yarmouth marriage record from 1887, Mr. Charles Hill and Miss Julia E. Packer getting married. Here's the 1900 U.S. Census for Cumberland, and it shows Charles and Julia, who we just saw get married, with their children, including Roy, and two other children, Everett and Laura. You'll remember from his obituary that he was survived by a sister, Laura Hill Hamilton, here on Shebig. Well, there's Laura, and a quick check found the birth records for both of them so that we could put those into his family tree. Then what of his father? Unfortunately, Charles died in 1900. He had diabetes, according to his death record, but his death record not only establishes that he was a carpenter again, but it names his father, Charles E. Hill, and his mother, Mary J. Turner, father born in Yarmouth, mother born in Freeport. And so we work back another generation. So in the 1880 U.S. Census, now I'm looking for Charles H. Hill, Roy's father, when he was a boy. And we found him down at the bottom of the page, as expected, in a household with Charles as the father and Charles H. as the 17-year-old son. This particular page of the census, even though it's Yarmouth, conveniently says Cousins Island right up at the top, so that the inspector, or the enumerator, noted that he was out on that part of Yarmouth when he was taking these names down. And up at the beginning of the list, before he got down to the hills, were the Packers. And Julia E., that our Charles later married, was just down the street. Charles, the father, and his wife, Mary, survived their son. And so here they are in the 1900 census. But this entry gives us not just their names, but also that he was born in August 1833 in Maine. She was born in December of 1837 in Maine. She's had 7 children, of whom 5 have survived. But that gives us a chance to know how far back should we be looking as we try to go to the next generation. I looked at the 1860 US Census. And there I found Charles E. and his new bride, Mary, one of two families living in the same house. And the first family in the house is Rufus Hill. He's 32 and Charles is 26. And so I thought, golly, they're probably brothers, but we can't know that for sure from the record. But I went back to 1850, and there is Charles, and there is Rufus, and there is Jacob Hill. The 1850 census didn't ask what relationship people were in various houses. So you can't assume, you can't be sure that this is a father and mother and their children, but it looks pretty reasonable to have that as an assumption. Just a Shabbat connection with the 1850 census. The 1850 census is the first one which people were not just counted with tick marks, but actually every individual by name. And that happened because in Massachusetts, there was a doctor named Lemuel Shattuck who was involved in genealogy, but also in public health. And he thought that there would be a public health value in taking a census in which you named every person so that you could then track them through life and see if there were recurrences, diseases or the like. And the Shattuck Hospital in Boston is named after him. That was so successful in the 1840s in the censuses that were taken in Massachusetts that he was brought down to Washington in 1850 to help design the 1850 federal census. And that's why we now have an every name census for everybody in the United States. And that's a collateral line, but a connected line to the Shaddocks here on Shabbat. So we've got Jacob Hill and Phoebe as the likely parents here. This is the marriage record for Charles and his wife, Mary Turner. I had a little trouble with this one because that looked like an E to me. Sometimes reading script is difficult, or that might be a C, but I knew I was looking for a Charles E. Hill from the records we'd already looked at. But his death record says Charles E. C. Hill, so it's both of them. So he died on Cousins Island, and his wife was Phoebe. He was the son of Jacob and Phoebe. That is established that those were not just relatives on the earlier census we looked at, but actually a mother and father. It says Folly here, and that's somebody's having trouble reading something off of an original record. And his wife, Mary, passed away at roughly the same time. Actually makes me wonder, I'd have to go back and look and see when did that big epidemic in the 19-teens come through. I think it was later than this, but those are deaths very close to each other. But she supposedly died of an ovarian cyst and he of apoplexy, so it may not have been an epidemic. But if I wanted to pursue her family, I now know that her father was a shoemaker and her mother was a Sylvester from Freeport. And there's their tombstone on Cousins Island. So how far have we gotten back now? We've gone from Roy 3 generations to Jacob Hill and Phoebe or Folly on Cousins Island. Not far to go to get to the American Revolution. This is the marriage record from Cumberland in 1813. Jacob Hill and Miss, thank goodness, Phoebe Manson getting married. And something that I was curious about but haven't had a chance to research, he was in Cousins Island in Yarmouth. They got married in Cumberland, and I'm wondering if the Mansons ever had a Shabbat connection. Donna?
Cumberland was not even a town in 1813. It must have been North Yarmouth. They were all North Yarmouth.
Okay, this is indexed online because it must now still be in the Cumberland town records.
Oh yeah, they have copies of all of the towns that were part of that. Each have copies of the records.
Great. Okay, so this was just before they got married, and here are their grave markers on Cousins Island. Where did Jacob come from? He was born January 1st, 1789, to Eliezer and Hannah. The Cumberland, and this must be a consolidated report for the towns, because this is obviously a notebook that somebody copied things into, has Ebenezer Hill and Hannah Green getting married in 1788. But fortunately, there's a second record for this one, which must be the original one, which is now in the county, and that clearly has Eliezer Hill and Hannah Green. So now we know that next generation were Eliezer and Hannah, and there's their tombstone on Cousins Island. So we've gone one more generation back, and he was born in 1764. So we've gotten at least before the American Revolution. Is it at all possible that he would have fought? Well, the war started in 1776, so that's 1764. He would have been 12 years old when it started. We'll have to see. I noticed in the Cousins 1830 census that Eliezer is there. That tick mark says that he's between 60 and 70. And there's a man named Hezekiah there, and that tick mark says he's between 70 and 80. And I just sort of thought, that looks like brothers to me. There's a Hezekiah Jr., so we know that the next generation has already started down, and he's actually pretty old too. And one thing that I saw without a source online said the Hill brothers had come to Cousins Island from Bridgewater, Massachusetts. No proof of that, just an assertion, but it was worth following out. And sure enough, in the records of Bridgewater, Massachusetts, there's an Eliezer, born June 17, 1764, to Jacob and Abigail, and a Hezekiah, a child of Jacob and Abigail, born 10 years earlier in 1754, which would comport with those two brothers who showed up in that census. So there they are, the two brothers. So now it's just a matter of looking for a Massachusetts Revolutionary War record for Eliezer Hill to see, could he possibly have served? And sure enough, in 1779, when he was 17 years old, he did 6-month service in the Continental Army in Rhode Island. This is from a book that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts published around 1900, going through all their archives and identifying all of their Revolutionary War soldiers and sailors. But online, here on Shabig, on the Sunday afternoon that I was doing this, I was also able to look at the actual index cards to the muster rolls for that particular unit that showed what days was Eliezer being paid for having served during this time. So the answer to our question is yes, he did. Roy Hill did have an ancestor who served in the Revolution. My point here is not trying to get him admission to the Sons of the American Revolution. Before I'd submit the application, I'd do a whole lot more research to make sure that we haven't confused two people with the same name, or that we've established each of these steps. My point for tonight is just, I was able to do all of this: marriage records, death records, birth records, Social Security records, military records, grave records, censuses, across the centuries, just from my desk here on Shabig, because of all these records having been digitized and now put online. I consider that the biggest new development in genealogical research. For people, I'm sure Donna spent more days cranking microfilm reels than she cares to remember, and now we've got shortcuts that can help us, but with images of actual sources that we can rely on, we can answer some of our genealogical questions. Now, if you liked the charts that I was preparing, those all come automatically just by typing the data in as I found each record. This says he was born this day, this says that he was born in this place here, another one says what his mother's name was, and you put them into a very easy database and it creates the charts. It's an application called Legacy that I've been using for about 25 years that I just find very useful. There are others like Roots Magic and others that are very good. I'm not sure whether Legacy works on Macs or not. You'd have to look into that. But what happened? Pardon?
Gloria Brown put it on one of the, the PCs at the museum because we couldn't put it on the Mac.
Yep, okay.
So that was a while ago.
So this may be better for people who are Windows, but what the new news is in June of this year, they announced that they were going to make this software program available for free going forward. So it's a good program, it's a real workhorse, and you can just go to the Legacy Family Tree website and download it for free. So news to know.
And this does not share information on like Ancestry.com?
Exactly, this is one that can sit on your own computer and you're only sharing information you want to, as opposed to there are lots of places now that are saying you can put your family tree on our website, but then it gets mixed in with other people's family trees and you don't have control either over who sees it or how accurate it is as other people decide, oh no, that's wrong, my grandmother told me we were born in Scotland. Yeah. The last thing I just want to talk, and this won't take very, very long, but I just wanted to make reference to it, is the 1950 census. Every 10 years since 1790, the Constitution requires the Congress to take a census of all the inhabitants of the United States. And this divides up how money gets spent, it divides up how seats in Congress get allocated. Since 1850, it's been an every name census, which is glorious for us genealogists. And the 1950 census, as I mentioned earlier, because they thought nobody could possibly outlive 72 years, that's a safe time. After 72 years, Congress said census information can be made public. And so the 1950 census was made available in 2022. The best place to look at this is at a website called Ancestry.com because they've got a whole bunch of tools that they've added to it that make it easy for searching it. So these images that you're going to see are from Ancestry.com, not from Family Search. But there you find Roy Hill with his wife Mabel and his son Freeland as a building contractor here on Chebbig. Of course, if there's a record that you might be in, the first thing one has to do is go look for oneself, which I did. And there I am at the age of 2 in Lewisboro, New York. Whoops, what did I just do? Let me pull this back down to the top, to the bottom. Yes, there I am. And I will go to full screen.
Maybe slideshow, Toby.
Yes. And so there I am. But we also can look at Chebbig and see who we might find that was around in 1950. There's Hartley Brewer, there's Charles Michael Kuntz, there's Jane Frizzell, there's Jackie Trask. There is the sponsor of the Ellsworth Memorial Lecture Series, George E. Cat Leonard. Then there's the Ellsworth Miller household, including our retiring president and leader, Donna. I could not quite read this. Does that say April, or were you born on April 6th?
I was born on April 6th.
So this.
I went through it and found out I was the youngest person. Because all of a sudden when I saw how old I was, that I didn't think I'd be in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was the youngest person in Chebbig.
Usually it's people in households as of,
Sharon Bowman was next to me. She was in the end of February, and Michael Hamilton hadn't been born yet.
so I thought everybody would be interested in seeing those links.
I don't know. What's the date on that, Toby? Can you tell on the date they did the enumeration?
Let's go back to the first one. One more. The enumeration date is not April 17th.
Okay, April 17th.
April 17th.
I was 11.
You were 11 days old, rushing to get into the records. This may sound corny, but knowing that I will return dust to dust, it gives me some satisfaction to know that I am now in an official record of the United States of America that's going to be there forever that says I was here. So, DNA is helpful for some, but not all genealogical questions, but it's got a lot of privacy questions swirling around it. Artificial intelligence, at least so far, don't believe what you read or see. Digitized records are a phenomenal new resource for us. The 1950 census is a new resource to help us understand more recent households. And the important thing is just keep going back to the original records, but now we've got a tool to do that with. So that's my thought.